Maybe I'll just share a little bit about what we do at Acumen Learning and then turn the time over to Kevin. So at Acumen Learning, we believe that understanding business is the key to unlocking an organization's potential. Hey, Brendan, good to see you. We help people master business acumen through our 5 drivers model framework, business model framework that helps people connect and align their role, their role to their company's mission. And then on an individual level, we help people find greater purpose, meaning, and engagement in their work. We offer a wide offering of training courses, everything from customized training offerings to train the trainer and also self-paced options. So excited to introduce Kevin Cope, best-selling author, founder and CEO of Acumen Learning. Kevin actually founded Acumen Learning in 2002, actually with my dad, Stephen M.R. Covey. So there's some great history there. I've known Kevin for most of my life, and he's an incredible business and thought leader, fantastic CEO, one of the best people I know. So with that introduction, Kevin, I'll turn the time over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Hey, welcome everyone. Again, I'd love to get a few more people on the video feed. Many of you may deliver content and know what that's like, so I'd love to have a few more faces on the video feed with me. And also, we're going to be using the chat box. I'd love to have this be interactive. And there's 2 ways that we can be interactive in this session. One is you can send me a chat box note. If you have a question or a comment, I'm going to ask for a lot of comments. Also, you could just go off mute and tell us your question or respond to the questions here. So first of all, what is business acumen? I would suggest it's understanding how your company makes money and acting to improve the money-making process. So if you look at it, there's 2 parts there. One is you need to understand business. And then the second part is you need to use that knowledge to then make better business decisions for your organization. And as Stephen mentioned just a minute ago, engagement gets a lot of attention right now. I think Gallup put the worldwide cost of lack of engagement at something like $7 or $8 trillion. In the United States, it's hundreds of billions. I think last I saw was $600 or $700 billion. We believe that when people are really clear on how your company makes money and they can understand how in their role they can impact business results, that's not only good for the company and the individual's career, but it creates engagement in an organization. So we're all about business acumen. That's what we teach, business and financial acumen in organization. And so for most of this presentation, I just want you to experience the content and understand the model. So why is business acumen important? Matter of fact, in the chat box, let me pose that question. Why is it important in your organization? Either for you or your organization. We kind of described what it is, so why is it important? I'll outweight you on this. So in the chat box, or you can go off mute, just speak. Gonna wait you out, team. If I do it the first time, then that'll keep us using the chat box and interacting. So either come off mute. Why is business acumen important in your organization? Or you can mention it in the chat box. Okay, Becca, it helps employees make strong choices about prioritization. Boy, that's important today, Becca, because if you think about it, there's a lot of different options. People are much more aware of options out there and what can be done. The internet has really created that broad sense of, boy, we could do this, we could do that. And so if you have business acumen, as Becca said, it'll help you prioritize maybe what the best option is. It drives decision-making. It helps each person understand how they impact the company, as we talked about. Thank you, Shannon. To be better strategic partners. I like that, Jamie, because a lot of us, employees want a seat at the table. They want to be where decisions are made and kind of the key strategies of the organization are being discussed. And if a person has business acumen, they can get that seat at the table. When we understand our role, we become more invested in company success. Thank you, Chris. It helps employees be aligned with company strategy. Yeah, love that idea of alignment. And then finally, from a sales perspective, helping understand the customers I'm selling into. Boy, I'll bet 30% of the audiences we work with are in sales. And when a salesperson is not just selling the product or service that they have, but they're aligning what they do with how it will help their client with their business priorities, then you're really a trusted business partner or advisor in that situation. So thank you for those comments. Let me show you a video here, short video. Business acumen, it's not just working harder. I think, our employees are working harder. It's working smarter. All right. I don't know how many of you saw that coming, but I like this guy. So I live in Utah and we get a bit of snow in the winter. And if I leave my truck outside, my tendency is maybe to scrape a little, spot so I can see forward and then my rearview mirror so I can see backwards. But this guy really leaned into the job. I mean, it's cold outside, but he was quite efficient in what he was doing. He got the windshield wipers, the taillights, the headlights. But ultimately, he was working on the complete, the wrong situation, the wrong challenge, the wrong problem. So while he was working hard, he wasn't working smart nor effectively. And so when people have a better understanding of how your company makes money, they're better aligned around what's most important, as Becca said, the priorities of the company, and then they can be more hardworking and efficient in moving the ball forward. Now, if you were to start a business, what would it be? In a minute, I'm going to have you put this in the chat box. But while you're thinking about it, let me share another business that's important to me that I think a lot about. I love what we do at Acumen Learning. We're now 22 years in business. Love what we do, but about 10 years ago, it's been about 3 weeks ago that they celebrated their anniversary. This is a picture of my family. We've got 6 kids, and now we've got 8 grandkids. But sons 2 and 3, 10 years ago, came to me and said, hey, we've got this idea. They were amateur photographers. And they couldn't find a travel bag for photography that they really liked. And they said, hey, we want to start a business. Will you invest? And I did. And not long after that, they hired their older brother, Austin, and then their younger brother, Connor. So my 4 sons run this company called Wandered. And they've now sold in 150 countries and doing quite well. But it's been really fun for me to watch this business grow and have them apply the business principles that we teach at Acumen Learning. So while I love what I do, here's another business that I pay attention to. So in the chat box, if you were to start a business, what would it be? Now, I know you love what you're doing, love your job, never want to leave. But if you did, is there something else that would be intriguing for you? All right, we got a men's coaching program. Thank you, Chris. Dance studio. Anjali, thank you. Wedding planning company. Oh, Julie, you're brave. Let me see. Kids clothing. My daughters want more comfortable clothes. Bourbon and cigar lounge, says Chris. So let's actually pick on Chris. So let's say we're all helping Chris start this bourbon and cigar lounge. By the way, Chris, where's this going to be located?
Lexington, Kentucky.
Lexington, Kentucky. Yeah. So in Lexington, Kentucky, we've got Chris starting this cigar and bourbon lounge. In the chat box, or come off mute, what would Chris need to get started in this business? We're all going to help him get this thing off the ground. What's he going to need to have and do? All right, a liquor license. Yep. Capital, says Brennan. By the way, when you think of capital, that's another word for cash, money. What else is Chris going to need to get this off the ground? A good location. Yeah, they say location, location, location. You got to get that right. Raw materials, infrastructure. Yeah, so he's going to have to build out this lounge. If he's leasing it, so he'd have to do some improvements, or if he's building a brand new building, need a business plan. Boy, why would you need a business plan? Jamie, thank you for that. Team, why would you need a business plan? By the way, while you're thinking, Becca said customer knowledge, vision, mission, marketing plan. Yeah, so a business plan would not only be important to get really clear on what your strategy is, you might also need it to get your funding. Brendan mentioned you're going to need capital or cash, and a business plan would help an investor or a bank know if this is the right investment for them. So, what percent, Chris, sorry to say this, what percent of startups make it actually 5 years? You got a brand new startup. What percent in the chat box, what percent of startups actually make it 5 years? It's going to be higher than you think, by the way. 10% higher. Thanks, Chris. Anybody else want to win? 50%. That's exactly right. About 50% make it 5 years. I get another 35%. So you've got about, even though 50% sounds a lot higher than what most people think, when you think about it, you've got a 50-50 chance, a 1 in 2 chance of actually having a business survive 5 years. And then many actually don't make it past that. So the odds go down over time. So what gets in the way? Well, if you think about it, a number of things do. One, people underestimate their need for cash. They might think, well, I'll start a business. And I think after 3 months, it'll be able to cash flow. They underestimate how long it takes to get a business off the ground. Another is the wrong product. Or the wrong timing, or they work with the wrong people. I also find that some people get into business because they're passionate. Chris, I'm sure you like cigars and bourbon. Some people get into a business thinking, hey, wouldn't it be fun to be around cigars and bourbon? And then quickly find out that when starting a business, it's a lot different than a hobby or a passion, where you've got to figure out the money-making process. Well, I would suggest that if you could get your arms around 5 business drivers, it will give you great insight into any business, whether it's a business you're starting, whether it's a business you're working in, whether it's a customer you're serving, whether it's a company you want to invest in, maybe buy stock in. This model will give you a framework of how to think about how a company makes money. It's what executives think about, and it's what analysts use to pay attention to companies or to analyze companies. The first 3 business drivers are cash, profit, and assets. And the reason I know these are critical to your organizations is that every organization, every publicly traded company has to submit 3 financial statements to the Securities and Exchange Commission every quarter at the end of the year. It's the statement of cash flows, the profit and loss, and the balance sheet. So that's why I know cash, profit, and assets are critical to business. And even if you're not publicly traded, privately held companies still use these to measure success, track performance, and pay their taxes. Now, the 4th business driver is growth. And growth is there because that is what builds value in a business. And I'll speak more to that later. And then finally, in the middle, as you might have guessed, is people, which is employees meeting the needs of customers. And when that happens, it drives cash, profit, assets, and growth. So we're going to dive into each one of these and spend just a couple of minutes getting more familiar with this model. So, and in this process, you're going to get 5 lessons, 1 lesson for each one of the business drivers. So starting with cash. What do they say about cash? Cash is king, right? Cash is a company's oxygen supply. And I love this quote from Al Shigart that said, cash is more important than your mother. Now, I got to think he loves his mom, but he was making the statement that if you don't get cash right in the business, nothing else matters. And as you think about it, what happened, and in the chat box, what happens to companies that run out of cash? Really, there's 2 things. In the chat box, if a company runs out of cash, what's going to happen? What are the options? So Chris says they're either going to close or go bankrupt. Brendan says bankrupt, or Jamie says shrink. Okay, Julie, we're getting on the right, the other. So one is they're going to go out of business, or second, they're going to be able to find cash somewhere. Those are your 2 options if you run out of cash. Either go out of business or figure out a way to get more. That's the Sears catalog, by the way. I know that, what did they go bankrupt about 5-6 years ago? They were a 130-year-old company. And it's a bit nostalgic for me because growing up, I'm probably the oldest person on the call here, but growing up, shopping for a birthday or a holiday was all about sitting down on the floor and going through the Sears catalog. So I've got great memories with that. Now, here's what's interesting. I'd find what I wanted. I'd let my mom or dad know, and they'd call an 800 number, give them their credit card, and it would get shipped either to the house or the post office. Literally, Sears was doing virtual shopping decades ago. And at one point, they were the largest retailer in the world. But after 130 years, they go out of business. They run out of cash. go out of business. So there's not a point in time where you can say, hey, we can ignore cash now. We're good. We've got plenty. It's something you got to be vigilant on. Now, can a company have too much cash? Cash is good, but could a company have too much cash? Yes or no in the chat box. Could a company have too much cash? Thinking. Okay, got a yes, one yes. Another yes, another yes. No, it can be invested. I like your thinking there. Yeah, so it's a bit of an and here. The reality is having too much cash is a good problem to have for an organization, but it still can be a challenge. And here's a couple of reasons why. Number one, if you've got more cash than you need to run your business, shareholders don't like it because they know you're not getting a great return on that. So while you can invest it, it's probably not going to be invested at the kind of rate that your investors or shareholders are going to be happy with. So that's the challenge with excess cash. Matter of fact, boy, this has been about 9 years ago. Apple was sued by two of their largest shareholders. They were sitting on over $200 billion in cash, and their shareholders were saying, look, either invest it and get some kind of return that's better than what I could get at the bank, or give it back to me. And the two ways you can give cash back to shareholders is either by buying back your own stock or paying dividends. So companies get a little bit challenged when they have more cash than they need because shareholders want them to put it to use, and if they're not going to give it back to them. So as we think about, here's an important lesson around cash. I've been talking about cash from the standpoint of how much a company has at a point in time, their cash balance or their cash position. There's another measure called cash flow that's also important. So if you think about it this way, let's say Jen, we're looking at Jen's financials. And let's say that if you looked at her savings account, there's $20,000 at a point in time. Sorry, Jen. She said, don't look at mine. But anyway, we won't ask you for the actuals. We'll just make some assumptions. So let's say that Jen has right now $20,000 in her savings account. That's at a point in time. Anytime you look at your savings and your cash positions, what do I have right now? And that's what we were talking about with Apple having over 150 billion cash. Now, another important measure is cash flow. So for example, if we're looking at Jen's checking account, and let's say over a year's period of time, Jen has $50,000 coming in, actual cash in her checking account. And we also see that she had actual cash expenses of $40,000 in that same year's period of time. Well, her additional cash flow is positive, and it's $10,000. Now, what do you think is more important for an organization, cash on hand or cash flow? In the chat box, what do you think? Cash on hand or cash flow? Okay, I got a vote for cash flow, many more votes for cash flow. That is the bigger measure. And it simply indicates or looks at how much cash your company can generate in a period of time. And if it is cash flow positive, that's important. But think about it. Let's go back to Chris and starting up his bourbon and cigar bar in Lexington. If you think of building out, the restaurant or location that he has, he's hiring people, he's getting inventory. Well before he opens the doors, he's invested a lot of money. So at the beginning of a startup, you are going to be cash flow negative in the business. Once you get cash flow positive, that's an important milestone, and you don't ever want to become cash flow negative again. So one of the important measures your executives look at in your organization is your cash from operations. All right. So we've talked about cash. Let's now move to our second business driver, which is profit. And I love what Sister Irene Krauss said. She said, no margin, no mission. By the way, I heard Stephen R. Covey quote that quite often. No margin, no mission. The idea is if you have a phenomenal mission, but you're not able to make any money at that venture, then the mission is going to be short-lived. And conversely, if you're able to make a lot of money but don't have a powerful mission, well, you're not going to engage your employees. There might not be much passion in the organization. Therefore, ultimately, your company may struggle. And so I love the idea of both of those, margin and mission, being powerful. In the chat box, what companies come to mind to you when you think of companies with powerful missions as well as they run a great business and they're profitable? What companies come to mind for you as you think about margin and mission? So we got an Apple, we got a Nike, great examples, a Stryker, yeah, NVIDIA, Costco. Costco is one of my favorite. I call it the $500 store because you don't go in and get a loaf of bread. Along the way in Costco, you see, boy, a case of batteries that you know, and a 10-pack of gloves. So the $500 store. So margin and mission. You know, in some circles, profit has become a dirty word, especially if you look at the global financial crisis about 15 years ago. Boy, there was a real pushback against profit in organizations. And I love what Albert Chu said. Stephen, do you mind reading this quote from Albert Chu?
Absolutely. He says, generating a profit is the most benevolent thing we can do for our employees and customers because profit is what allows us to continuously reinvest in the business for their benefit.
Yeah, I love this idea. Albert is saying that profit is a noble, it's benevolent pursuit because that's what allows you to then reinvest in your employees, reinvest in your business, reinvest in those things that help drive your mission forward. Now, let me give you one more example of why both are important. This is the mission statement from Japan Airlines, and they were founded in the 50s, and in part because it was on the heels of World War II. They stated this in their mission: we will not only transport people and goods to their respective destinations safely and on time, but we'll also bring peoples, their cultures, and their hearts together as our contribution to world peace and prosperity. I like that. Now you might look at it and think, oh, you know, that's a bit optimistic, isn't it? World peace and prosperity. But think about it. When people are face to face, they actually treat each other differently. And so Japan Airlines saw that they were able to facilitate getting people face to face. Great mission. Challenge. Again, in the global financial crisis, they declared bankruptcy. And in the process, laid off 15,600 employees and their whole board resigned in disgrace. So think about this. How focused is a company going to be on their mission when they're in bankruptcy? The reality is they're not going to be at all. They're in survival mode. So only companies that run a great, successful business are able to have the investment money and the energy and the time to be able to invest in mission. So again, no margin, no mission. Now, what I'd like to do is share with you what the typical P&L statement would look like for the S&P 500. So there's 500 companies in the S&P 500. And if you were to look at the average of the P&Ls for 500 companies in all in different industries, what would that look like? And so let me show you what that looks like from the perspective of for every $100 they generate, what happens to that $100? How much ends up in their profit line? So starting with total revenue, sometimes called sales, sometimes called a company's top line because it's the top line on this P&L. So the first expense that comes out is cost of goods sold, or that's sometimes called cost of products sold. In the chat box, what two primary expenses are in cost of goods or cost of products sold? Two primary expenses in cost of goods sold. What are they? It's the biggest expense a company has, so this is important. So one, Julie says, is raw materials. Exactly right. There's one other. People. It's the direct labor costs. So you've got direct labor of those involved in the manufacturing process and the raw materials. And for the average company, that's the biggest expense they will have. Now, when you take out cost of goods sold, you come to gross profit. There are actually going to be three profit measures on this one. I'm going to show you two profit measures. There are actually four on most P&Ls. But gross profit then is sales minus cost of goods sold. And for the average company, for every $100 in sales, they make $47 in gross profit. Now, obviously, you want gross profit higher. And there's two ways you can do that, two levers. One is you can increase your pricing so that you've got more in sales, or you could lower your cost of products sold, meaning raw materials and direct labor. So after that, then you have selling, general, and operating expenses, or sometimes called SG&A within an organization. When you take that out, you come to operating profit. Sometimes that's called EBIT, earnings before interest and tax. When you take out interest and taxes, you come to net profit, or a company's bottom line. Net profit, net earnings, they're all synonymous. So top line is sales, bottom line is profit, and in between you've got expenses. And then a fourth profit measure for public companies would be earnings per share. That's simply profit divided by the number of shares. Now, what I wanted to point out to you here is that for the average company, for every $100 of sales, $10 goes to their bottom line. Or in other words, they have a net profit margin of 10%. Now, you may want to take a picture of this slide so you can kind of have in your mind's eye what the average company's P&L or profit and loss looks like from the standpoint of top line sales, bottom line costs, and what percent of dollars actually flow to that bottom line, that net income line. By the way, this is one of the most important measures your executives think about is the net profit for an organization. Now, if 10% is average, let me ask this. What companies in the chat box or come off mute do you think have higher profit margins than 10%? 10% is average. What companies can you think of that you would believe would have much higher profit margins? So let me see. Raul says Apple. Stella says tech companies. You're exactly on the right track. Yeah, FANG. Boy, that's Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Those were the FANG companies. Amazon might surprise you. And by the way, not all the FANG companies have higher profit margins. So let's look at a few. NVIDIA, a 55% profit margin, if you can believe that. $100 in sales, and even after tax, $55 or a 55% profit margin. Unbelievable. Visa, 53%. You've got Microsoft at 35, McDonald's at 32, JP Morgan at 30, Google at 29, Apple at 24, Coca-Cola at 22, Johnson & Johnson at 17%. As you look at those companies, what is it that allows them to have higher profit margins? What's at play here, team? In the chat box or come off mute. Why the higher profit margins for these organizations? Unique offering. Scale, barriers to entry, unique, you're all right on the right track. These companies are selling something unique. And if it's unique, you're willing to pay more for it. Let's take a couple as an example. Look at Google. What is it? Over 90% of searches are done on Google. And so they can charge more for their ads, and therefore they've got higher margins. Coca-Cola is an interesting one. Does any other companies do something similar to Coke? Well, absolutely. But when you open Coke, you open happiness. And who doesn't want happiness? And so there's demand for Coke. McDonald's is an interesting one. McDonald's is actually a real estate company as it is a fast food company. So when they build they add a new franchise, let's say they add one in Salt Lake City, Utah, McDonald's corporate actually owns the building and rents that or leases that to the new franchisee. So every month, McDonald's gets two checks. They get a royalty check for the fast food that's sold. They also get a rent check. So they're more of a real estate company than not. Well, so these companies are selling something unique. Let's contrast that to low margin companies. So who would be on this list? Companies with thin margins. Not necessarily selling something unique. I would suggest they're selling commodities. So yeah, right, Raul, that Netflix, McDonald's, The Founder is a great show on kind of McDonald's story. All right, let me see. Oh, Walmart and Costco, yeah. Thin margins. Matter of fact, they're on my list. Amazon. So when I said not all the FANG companies were on the higher margin list, Amazon is one of the FANG companies, 8% profit margin. Alibaba, 7% profit margin. Shell, 6%. Volkswagen, 4%. Costco, 3%. Kroger, 2%. And Walmart, 2% as well. So these companies, why the low margins? They're not selling something unique. They're selling items that are commoditized. Think about it. If you want to get a gallon of milk, think of all the places you can get a gallon of milk. You can get it at a Kroger, a Walmart, a Costco, a gas station, a small convenience store. And because milk is commoditized and you can get it in so many places, companies then have to lower the price in order to compete on that. Therefore, the thin margins. Stella mentioned oil companies. Think about it. When you buy gas, are you buying just a particular brand of gas? Most people don't. They go to where gas is cheapest. And so again, gas is a commodity as well. So thus the thin margins. So if you're not unique, you better be cheap. All right. So as you look at this model, I would suggest it's really important for each one of us to understand our company's profit and loss statement, our P&Ls, so that we can make better decisions on how to support our company's strategy and our performance on the profit and loss statement. Also, you need to create alignment with your teams and your people around the decisions that need to be made to support your company's strategy on improving your profit and loss statement. All right. One last kind of comment on profit before we move on. Love this story. In 1999, Alcoa gathered a team of engineers, researchers, and marketers together to figure out the best way to fit a 12-pack of soda in the fridge. So before that time, it was a 6-pack. They came up with this idea of a fridge pack. And simply changing the packaging of the product. By the way, Alcoa is an aluminum company. So this strategy that they deployed and then took it to their customers, like Coca-Cola, increased Coke sales 10% in its first year. And if you're increasing your sales by 10% and packaging isn't costing you much to change, well, that's a whole lot more profit for the organization. All right, let's move to our third business driver, which is assets. An asset is anything you own or control that has value. And if you think of the list of assets that you have in your organizations, matter of fact, in the chat box, what are some of the assets you have in your organization? Okay, we got buildings, IP, got cash. What else do we have? Inventory would be in that mix as well. And the goal is not to amass as many assets as you can get. Think about it. You're not trying to get more building space than you need. You're trying to have the right amount of building space. So you are trying to balance asset strength, which is the ability to stay viable during the ups and downs in the marketplace, with asset utilization, meaning the ability to efficiently and effectively use assets to generate a profit. So I mentioned building space. If you've got more building space than you need, that's not going to generate much return. It's going to sit there idle and not a good use of cash. If you've got too little space, well, maybe you don't have the room to manufacture your products. People don't have enough place to sit, so that's a challenge. So you want to get the right amount of building space. Even cash, we talked about. If you have a lot more than you need, shareholders aren't happy. By the way, it's a good problem to have, remember. But still, shareholders, are not happy. If you have too little cash, well, you might not be able to survive a downturn. So try to get the right amount of cash. Inventory. If you have too much inventory, it could become obsolete. You've got to store it, ties up cash. If you have too little inventory, well, you may not be able to meet customer demands when they place an order. So trying to balance asset strength with asset utilization. Couple of examples. 2016, Microsoft sitting on over $100 billion of cash, much more than they need. But they invest $26.2 billion in LinkedIn, which was a great return on that cash investment. One more idea here. UPS, tens of thousands of vehicles worldwide. With so many vehicles, if you can find incremental efficiencies on that, it would give you a big return. A driver comes up with the idea of avoiding left-hand turns. What's wrong with the left-hand turn? You got to wait for traffic. You're crossing traffic. That's where most accidents happen. And by simply rerouting trucks so that they're doing more right-hand turns on their routes, that saves 10 million gallons of gas annually and avoids emissions equivalent to over 20,000 cars every year. Chris, I do hope that person got a promotion. So they call it the Orion system at UPS. So again, it's how do we get the most out of our assets? And so too much in assets that we don't need is a problem. Too little could be a challenge, getting that balance right. One more example, Ford Motor Company in the 1920s. Part of what goes into the floorboards is plywood. So Henry Ford sees sawdust piling up in his yard and he has to pay to get rid of it. Well, he comes up with an idea with his cousin on how to put that sawdust to use. Any guess in the chat box or come off mute as to what product Henry Ford and his cousin came up with that used that sawdust that was a liability, had to get rid of it, but turned into something that was actually a useful asset? Pressed wood, plywood, great guess. It's not that. Chris, Jamie, yeah, wafer board, no. Great guess, Brennan, not plywood. It was actually the Kingsford Charcoal Company. And so at a time where they took a liability, sawdust, they had to get rid of its liability, and they figured out how to turn that into an asset. All right. Here's a video that illustrates when you think of any time you want to spend money in your organization, somebody's probably going to ask you, what's the return? You know, we're going to get this asset. What kind of return on that asset are we going to get? Here's a kid who wants a dog, and he makes a good return on dog, ROD case for why that makes sense. So you notice the kid's in the background playing with his dog. He made a good return on dog analysis or return on asset analysis. The husband there didn't pull off his analysis quite as well. So let's move on to our fourth business driver, which is growth. Now, let me start with this. Is growth important to your organizations? I'm guessing absolutely yes. In the chat box, why? Why is growth important to business, to your organizations? All right, growing companies attracts talent. Boy, I love that one. Not only is it good for the business, but people want to work for an organization that's growing and thriving. Stella says to investors, growth is vitally important to investors. If a company is growing profitably and sustainably, that will drive the value of an organization. If you're not growing, you're dying. Boy, isn't that true? For most, especially if you're in a competitive industry, if you're actually not innovating and moving forward, you're losing ground. Let me see. Law of nature, not growing, you're dying. Thank you, Chris. Growth facilitates innovation. Raul, isn't that so true? If you've got a growth mindset, it actually has a team, a company, sort of the psyche of the whole organization has a growth mindset. And then Jamie also said market share. So gaining market share gives you advantages. Gives you the ability to kind of dictate the terms in the marketplace, et cetera. So growth is important for a number of reasons. Now, let's go back to the P&L that we talked about earlier. Which would a mature company prefer growing faster? The top line sales or the bottom line profit? This is a mature company. If you're a brand new startup, it's all about growing sales. But I would suggest a mature company has a greater focus on the bottom line. I'm not saying your companies ignore sales. Absolutely not. You want to grow sales. But at the end of the day, you take profit to the bank. Profit is what you have left over to buy companies, to reinvest back in the business, to pay bonuses, et cetera. So, and what's interesting about this is Amazon took 8 years to turn a profit. 8 years to turn a profit. Shareholders were patient for that long, but finally they kind of got fed up and said, look, we know you can grow sales. We see that. That's why we still believe in the company, but you also have to figure out how to generate a profit. And so Amazon became a bit more focused on profitability and has done a good job on that since. Now, if you want to improve profit, and I mentioned this earlier, you've really got two levers. You can either raise more sales for the organization or reduce any of the costs in the business. Those are the two levers. So if you think about the messaging from your executives, it's often around how do we generate more volume, more sales, more top line revenue for the business, or how do we become more efficient, save money, analyze each process and see if we can become more efficient that way. Two fundamental levers, raising sales or lowering costs. Now, if you look at, let's say you're bringing in negotiation training, think of how that could help both grow sales and reduce costs. On the sales side, if you've got better sales folks negotiating better deals with your customers, that could drive sales. Also, if you have negotiation skills, your purchasing department can negotiate better deals with suppliers. So good negotiation training could help both sales and could also help reduce costs. A comment here, would cost of low interest loans be considered cost of goods sold? Actually, Jamie, interest rates would be much lower on the P&L. Interest rates would be down here. So if you're paying interest on your borrowings, it won't show up in cost of goods sold, but it would show up down here in your interest and taxes section. That's a great question. Thank you on that. What if you brought in or you had better processes for onboarding employees much more quickly? Well, think about it. Where could that help sales? If you're onboarding marketing and salespeople faster, getting them up to speed faster, that could drive your sales. If you're onboarding, say, IT people, and you're helping your whole organization become more efficient, that could reduce costs. So negotiation training and also onboarding faster can help sales and reduce costs. So what about business acumen? There's a shameless plug. If you brought in business acumen in your organization, your salespeople will be better sales partners with the companies that they're trying to serve. That could raise sales. They might also use their business acumen to target the better markets, to approach those marketplaces, those customer segments that are actually more likely to buy from you. They're performing better in the marketplace. So that could help sales. People with business acumen within the organization, if they're making better business decisions, that will reduce costs. So I would suggest that business acumen, helping your employees get really clear on how your company makes money and acting to improve the money-making process will drive revenue and also reduce costs in your organization. Well, one last thought on growth. Again, earlier we talked about a mindset. This is a picture of two companies from 1991 to 2021. They're both in the same space. And the CEO of the company in red actually made a comment right at around 1991 when these companies were at about $32 billion in size. The CEO said, look, we're in a very mature market. There's really no more growth to be had. And that mindset permeated throughout the organization. And what they got was no growth. The company in blue had a whole different mindset and saw unlimited opportunities. These are two companies in the retail space. We've already mentioned both of them. Any guesses on our two? Two companies we're looking at here. Company in red is now bankrupt. The company in blue is almost at $700 billion in sales. Brendan, you're exactly right. It's Sears and Walmart. Yeah, thank you. All right. So the point here being that a growth mindset means everything within an organization. That's what shareholders expect and attracts great employees to an organization. On to our last business driver, which is people, which refers to employees and the customers that they serve. Now, notice where it is in the model. If you get that relationship right of employees anticipating the needs of customers, it's key to driving cash, profit, assets, and growth. So people are actually at the center of the model. Sometimes we think of ourselves in the L&D space, HR space, as sort of ancillary to the business. I would suggest we are at the core of the business. I'd also suggest this, team. I would rethink how you view yourself in the organization. Maybe you've already done this. Maybe all of you have already done this. But if you haven't, let me suggest this. I would think of yourselves not as people, HR folks that work in the business, but business people that just happen to work in the L&D and HR space. To change your mindset, not as, hey, I work in, L&D and, HR, to I'm a business person. I just happen to work in the L&D and HR space. That will change your own mindset. It will change the mindset of those that see you and how you perform in the organization if they see you as a business person first. And that mindset permeated throughout the organization drives cash, profit, assets, and growth. What's the number one reason an employee will leave their job? Well, according to Marcus Buckingham in the book, First Break All the Rules, people leave their managers, not their job. And so that's one of the key reasons they leave. Also, in a study done by the Conference Executive Board, and this was done across the world, quite comprehensive, they found the two key drivers of engagement. And in this case, it was discretionary effort. Discretionary effort would be connection between work and organizational strategy and importance of job to organizational success. It's where Stephen started his comments, and then I added on first thing on this call. When people are really clear on how they can impact their business results, when they know how they matter, how they make a difference, and how they fit into an organization, that's where you get engagement. That's where you get discretionary effort. So again, it starts right in the middle. And by you investing in your people, helping them get really clear on how your company makes money and what they can do to drive results, that's not only good for them and their engagement, it's going to improve the business results of your organization. Hopefully, as we're talking about our employees, they don't sound like this.
Your advertising mail campaign's paying off.
Business is good.
Must be if you're doing all that overnight shipping. That must cost a fortune.
It sure does.
Well, if it doesn't have to get there overnight, you could save a lot with priority mail flat rate envelopes. One flat rate to any state, just $4.95.
That's cool and all, but it ain't my money. I seriously do not care.
So you don't care what anyone says, you want to save this company money.
That's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah, getting employees really clear on how they matter and how they make a difference in your organization is key for engagement. Jenny, now switching from employees to customers, Jenny Rometty. Stephen, do you mind reading this? She's the former executive chairman of IBM.
You bet. She said, you define yourself by either what your customers want or what you believe they'll need for the future.
So a key here is anticipation. And in the chat box, which companies can you think of have anticipated exceptionally well? Who in your mind? Okay, Apple, NVIDIA, Apple. Boy, interesting how Apple is now mentioned four times right off the bat. I love this picture. This is St. Peter's Square on the left, taken in 2005. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see a forward thinker with a flip phone. And then the same location in 2013. This is an 8-year difference in time. In 8 years, look at how dramatically different we capture events now. And if you think of the smartphone, think of how many products and services that the smartphone has actually replaced. Compasses, alarm clocks, watches, video cameras, calculators, and the list goes on, day planners, etc. It's amazing the innovation that's been brought by the smartphone. Who's failed to anticipate? What companies come to mind there? Kodak, Sheila, Stella, that's one of mine as well. What other companies come to mind when you think about Blockbuster? That's my other. BlackBerry, yeah, great on that as well. So my first one, Blockbuster, was mentioned a couple of times here. And two, who took out Blockbuster? Ultimately, it was at the time Redbox as well as Netflix. And now everything's streaming. When's the last time that they used a DVD or a VHS player? Years ago. Sony had the Walkman, and that was the coolest thing ever. But the iPod quickly replaced, within a year's period of time, all cassette players and DVD players, and then now it's all streaming music. So your phone is a music player. And then Kodak was mentioned. Do you know Kodak was the one that invented digital photography back in the 70s? But they didn't protect it. They were so confident with their film business, they didn't even protect their new ideas and new innovations. And of course, smartphones completely took out, most Well, I got to say, the Instamatics are making a comeback. The kids think it's the coolest thing. Oh, look at this! I can take a picture and I can take a picture with this Instamatic, and out pops the actual picture. So they are making a little bit of a comeback, quite a novelty on that. Yeah, and then. And so when you think of companies that really anticipate versus those that miss, there's a dramatic difference, not only in mindset, as well as how those companies operate and perform, and then actually, ultimately their business results. So anticipating customer needs is critical. Well, we've now talked through each of these 5 business drivers. I wanted you to experience a bit of the content. We can, and now we're going to kind of switch to talking about it a bit and what we do. But I wanted you to experience the 5 drivers, and let me give you a way to remember these. And so if you'll do this, even if you're not on camera, do this with me. How will you remember these? A universal sign for cash is right there. So do that with me. There's cash. Profit. We talked about 2 things you can do to impact profit. You can either raise sales or lower costs. So do that with me. Okay, there's profit. Assets. We talked about strength and utilization. So give me a fist pump for assets, asset strength, like you mean it. There you go. Growth, you want it going up. And then people, close to the heart. So let's do it again. Cash, profit, assets, growth, and people. All right. Now you might think that's a little simplistic, but it will help sort of cement it up here. We've now gone through a lesson on each one of these 5 drivers. And let me kind of close with this thought before Steve and I then answer some questions and talk about how we approach organizations. And it's this: people work hard for a paycheck, they'll work harder for a person, and they'll work hardest for a purpose. Again, when they're really clear on how they can matter and make a difference in an organization and line their actions to that, you're going to get a lot more discretionary effort. You're going to get not just their backs, you're going to get their hearts and minds. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Stephen.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Every time I sit through this presentation, I learn something new. So yeah, I think as Kevin mentioned, let's open this up for questions. So you can either take yourself off mute or type something in the message box if you have any questions for Kevin. While you're thinking, maybe Kevin, I'll ask you a question. What does this look like? We kind of went through these the 5 business drivers. If someone on the call had an interest in bringing this within their organization, what does that typically look like?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So first of all, we deliver virtually in-person, hybrid, self-paced T3, any approach you can imagine. And if you're thinking of bringing in this topic, let me suggest there are 3 things you need to get right with it, whether you use us or somebody else. Number 1, it's got to be customized. It needs to be customized around your financial results as well as your business strategy. And so we customize this so that we're using your company, your competitors, your benchmark companies. So it's a real discussion, not about theoretical, business and finance. It's about your organization. So number 1, it's got to be customized. Also customized for the audience you're delivering to. Number 2, it's got to be engaging. This is a topic, if it doesn't capture the interest and imagination of your participants, it's going to be hard to stay engaged with. So we figured out ways. We use voting technology, video clips, a lot of the Socratic method, where there's a lot of discussion versus lecture, small group, large group activities, et cetera. And our average net promoter score, boy, what is it? It's above a 70%, which is a bit unheard of. And on a 5-point scale, we're averaging, I think, a 4.8 plus. So we figured out a way to take a tough topic and make it really accessible, engaging for the audience. The third thing, it's got to be actionable. People need to leave with a clear sense of, okay, now that I understand this, what am I going to do differently? And so in review, it's got to be customized around your business results. 2, it's got to be engaging. And then 3, it's got to be actionable.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Any other questions from the group? I've got another one if no one has anything. So I guess, Kevin, here's a question. I don't think I've asked you this before, but we have worked at Acumen Learning with like 34 of the 50 Fortune 50 companies. Is it ever surprising how we're working with like senior leaders and teaching this stuff? Is it ever surprising that it's like, shouldn't you have a grasp on this already? What's just curious your reaction to that.
Yeah, great question. So, as we mentioned on the front end, I started this with Stephen's father, Stephen M.R. Covey, who wrote The Speed of Trust, another best-selling book. And we really thought this would be good for frontline folks because everybody else got it. We thought, well, yeah, again, frontline, they could use this to be really helpful. And what we found out immediately and continue to validate is that you can go very senior in an organization and business acumen is lacking. And here's my sense: as companies grow, they specialize. And so when people get specialized around maybe marketing or IT or operations, they really become expert in that function, but they lose the big picture sense of how a company makes money. So we quite regularly are working with very executive level audiences, VP, executive VP, and even the C-suite within organizations. Now, it's got to be a different program. And so as part of that customization, if it's a frontline group, it's a very different conversation than it is with a director level or a hypo group, or if it's a very senior executive group. But we've had great success and great outcomes in working with every level in an organization. And by the way, Stephen, while I'm on that point, we do anything from a kind of a keynote, a 1-hour keynote, to a 4-day mini MBA and everything in between. And so, again, as we talked about, with an executive team, those tend to be more in person. If you have frontline folks, sometimes we're using our T3 option. Sometimes we're doing it in person, and sometimes they might do our self-paced, curriculum as well. So we've got solutions to kind of fit every level of audience, including the executives that we were just talking about, as well as frontlines and how to approach them in the way that best connects with how they learn.
Yeah, Kevin, one more. What about for sales teams?
Yeah.
How has this been applied with sales teams?
Yeah, I think I may have mentioned earlier, probably about a third of our programs are with sales organizations. Helping them again get really clear on how their client makes money. So when they come in and talk about their solution, it's from the standpoint of how can we help your business achieve your results, and here's how our solution can help you do that. Not just the kind of the features and the benefits, but a real connection to wanting to help their client improve their business results. So makes a big difference for a sales organization. We also do a fair amount with intact teams. So IT is a real audience for this. The L&D organization, HR departments are a big audience for this. We do a lot, I think I may have mentioned, with hypo groups. And then a lot of companies just have an open enrollment because people really have an interest in understanding this. They listen to your company's earnings call if you're publicly traded. They hear executives talk about the numbers, but it's usually done in a way that it does not connect with the average employee. And employees are hungry for this, fortunately for us.
Right. Awesome. Well, we're about at time, and if no one has any other questions, Becca has a question. Will there be a recording available of this session? Yes, Becca, we can make that available for you if you want.
Yeah.
So yeah, if
Becca, let's make sure we have your email address so we get that out to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then also if anyone here has a desire to, and thank you, Jamie, if anyone wants to talk more about how to bring this in their organization, let us know. You can email me directly, or also in the follow-up, you'll have an option to talk to us as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining and sitting in today. And again, if anyone else has any other questions, and yeah, Chris, we'll get that for you too. If anyone has a question, we'll stay on just for a second more if anyone has anything. But thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's great meeting you all. Have a great rest of the day.
Hey, Kevin
Brendan.
and Stephen, this is Chris Powell. I'm sorry I couldn't be on video today. I'm having to take this call outside and the sun is bright, which does not make for, you couldn't see me anyway.
Oh, no problem.
all
Where are
good.
you calling in from, Chris? Oh, you were in Lexington, right?
Yes, Lexington.
Yeah.
So I'm a financial advisor by profession, and it's a new career for me. I was in sales and first introduced to your book probably 10 years ago, maybe longer. When I first read it, I've read it now probably 3 or 4 times and always wanted to join. So thank you. But the reason for my my question, I was just getting ready to submit a form to you guys since I can ask you here. I follow a couple folks in the financial world who have podcasts. And I think your content and conversation with some of these folks could be absolutely tremendous. Do you do podcasts outside of anything that you post on YouTube just for Acumen Learning?
That's a good question, Chris. We're in the process of getting a podcast rolling. So
Very good.
I'm glad to hear there's a demand. And hey, if you have any suggestions on some of the people you listen to that you say, hey, you should have these type of people on, I would be all ears for that. But yes, I'm totally with you that we need to have a podcast because there's a lot of, and we work in so many different industries. We have so much insight into so many things. I think it makes sense, but it's good to hear from the outside too, that's a demand.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a couple ideas, so I'll send you an email, Stephen.
Awesome.
And
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Thank you guys. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, pleasure. Nice meeting you.